You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Today is Tuesday, April 27th, 2021, and this is your daily Star Trek news from the Roddenberry Podcast Network. On today's show, LeVar Burton takes on The View, covering Picard, Dr. Seuss, and, of course, Jeopardy. Producer David Zappone says he'd like to take on Enterprise once the Star Trek Voyager documentary is done. And I've got this week's Trek Trivia. I'm Alison Pitt, and today's show is sponsored by EveryPlate. Try EveryPlate for just $1.99 per meal, plus an additional 20% off your next 2 boxes by going to everyplate.com and entering code DSTN199. Today's show is also sponsored by BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of counseling by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. Right, so something a little bit different for today. Before we get into the news, a quick word from our sponsor, BetterHelp, the convenient, professional, and affordable online counseling service. If you've been thinking about seeing a mental health counselor, then now is the time to consider BetterHelp. With BetterHelp, you'll get personalized counseling that matches your needs and in a way that suits you. Get matched with a licensed counselor and start communicating with them in under 48 hours. Send messages anytime, or book a phone or a video chat, and you never have to sit in a waiting room. I want you to start living a happier life today. And as a daily Star Trek news listener, you'll get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DSTN. Right. First up, former Star Trek star and current Jeopardy host hopeful LeVar Burton has given a new interview with The View, in which he hit all the big topics, including his Jeopardy campaign, whether he'll be in Star Trek Picard Season 2, and what he thinks of cancel culture. Burton's interview appeared on Monday's episode of The View, starting the segment with a series of questions from fellow Star Trek alum Whoopi Goldberg. They led straight off with talk of Jeopardy. The fan petition supporting him as host has garnered more than 250,000 signatures, something that Goldberg called extraordinary. To that, Burton replied, "It's such a wonderful feeling to be at the center of that much grace." Host Joy Behar also wanted to talk Jeopardy and asked Burton straight up whether he was throwing his hat into the ring. Burton noted that as far back as 2013, he'd publicly stated his desire to take over the job from former host Alex Trebek once he retired. But more than anything, he said, "I'm eager to put up my skills against those of anyone else in contention, and then let the chips fall where they may. The most important thing for me is that I have an opportunity to compete for the job, and that's all I ever really wanted." Turning to topics of a political nature, later in the interview, host Meghan McCain asked Burton what he thought of cancel culture, particularly as it pertains to the Dr. Seuss estate deciding to stop printing 6 of their titles due to racist themes. As a children's literacy advocate, Burton handled the question well, reminding McCain that Dr. Seuss's legacy for children's education is overwhelmingly positive. He then clarified that he sees the term cancel culture as a misnomer. "I think we have a consequence culture," he said, "and that consequences are finally encompassing everybody in the society. I think it has everything to do with a new awareness on people who were simply unaware of the real nature of life in this country, for people who have been othered since this nation began." Of course, no interview with a former Star Trek The Next Generation star could go by without asking the big question: will he be making an appearance in Star Trek Picard? Burton told Goldberg coyly when she asked, "I can say unequivocally that I am not doing Season 2 of Picard." When pressed for more details, he only concluded, "Well, there's the thing. I believe it reasonable, in fact practical, to assume that Picard still knows these people. I think we might see some more of his friends. At least I hope we do before this is all over." LeVar Burton is due to guest host Jeopardy this July 26th through 30th. For more information on that appearance, including how to watch, visit Jeopardy.com. And to catch up on the latest season of Star Trek Picard, head over to Paramount+. Right, next up, riding on the success of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine documentary, What We Left Behind, 455 Films broke crowdfunding records last month with their campaign for the next Star Trek documentary, To the Journey, looking back at Star Trek Voyager. Director and producer David Zappone spoke with TrekCore.com's weekly Trek podcast recently, and TrekCore posted a condensed transcript of the conversation on their blog. In it, Zappone filled listeners in on many of the details of To the Journey's productions. However, at the very end of that interview, Zappone let it slip that it's his intention for a documentary featuring Star Trek Enterprise to eventually join 455 Films' growing collection of Trek-themed projects. "You know, I could be evasive and give you some kind of cheeky answer," Zappone said in the interview, "but I would love to tell the story of Enterprise. Absolutely, I would." Now, this news shouldn't be too surprising to Star Trek fans. The overwhelming fan support for the DS9 and Voyager projects would certainly indicate a potential audience for an Enterprise documentary. Back in December, Zappone said a DS9 sequel documentary was in the works. As there's been no new information on that project, it could very well be that Enterprise is next in line for the documentary treatment. To the Journey will be David Zappone's fifth Star Trek project. With a passion for the franchise, diving deep into Star Trek Enterprise is the next logical step. "I've become very close with those actors," Zappone told TrekCore. "It didn't go the 7 years the other shows went, but they did amazing work in that series. I would be remiss, I think, in stopping with Voyager. My intention is 100% to move on to Enterprise." To read and or listen to the full interview with Zappone, which has loads of great behind-the-scenes insight on the Voyager documentary's journey, you can do that at TrekCore.com. Now, I've got Trek Trivia Tuesday here in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, Every Plate, and my tummy. So, what did you have for dinner last night? Now, I do not want to brag, but I'm going to. My special man friend made me sweet and tangy cherry meatballs with roasted zucchini and garlic mashed potatoes, and it's one of the many affordable and delicious meals that you can get delivered from Every Plate. Now, this was not a heat and eat job. This was a tear up bits of bread for the meatballs and slice and roast actual zucchini kind of meal. And even though it definitely tasted complicated, it all came together in about half an hour. Bonus. See, that's what I really love about Every Plate. Their recipes are great, their portion sizes are great, and they're nice on your wallet. They are America's best value meal kit. And as a daily Star Trek news listener, you can try Every Plate for just $1.99 per meal, plus an additional 20% off your next 2 boxes by heading to everyplate.com and using the code DSTN199 when you sign up. Head to everyplate.com, click on Get Started, and use the code DSTN199 to try them out for $1.99 per meal and 20% off your next 2 boxes. That's everyplate.com and the offer code DSTN199. And a big thanks to Everyplate for sponsoring today's show. Now, it's Trek Trivia Tuesday. Did you know, in the Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5 episode Conundrum, the crew find themselves in the middle of a war and being used as pawns. After the entire ship's memories are erased, they are left to piece together what happened, knowing only that there are strict Starfleet orders to destroy an enemy command center and to keep strict radio silence. The war the crew found themselves in the middle of was between 2 races, the Lycians and the Satarans. While neither side had weaponry that could threaten a starship, the Satarans were skilled at memory suppression, and it was a Sataran agent who had infiltrated the ship, wiped the crew's memories, and tried to convince them to attack the Lycian Central Command. So now, a trivia question for you. In Conundrum, while on the ship, the Sataran agent pretended to be the Enterprise's first officer, but what did he give as his name? Find out on Friday's episode of Daily Star Trek News. Well, that's it for today's Daily Star Trek News from the Roddenberry Podcast Network. Don't forget to check out the other great shows on the network at podcasts.roddenberry.com. Daily Star Trek News is produced by me, Alison Pitt, with selected stories by Chris Peterson. Today's show was sponsored by BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of counseling by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. Today's show was also sponsored by EveryPlate. Try EveryPlate for just $1.99 per meal, plus an additional 20% off your next 2 boxes by going to everyplate.com and entering the code DSTN199. I'm back tomorrow with more of the Star Trek news you need to know, and This Week in Trek History. I'm Alison Pitt. Live long and prosper.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.